Hi everyone, this is Ken Aldrich. He's been kind enough to take some time today to give some life advice to me and all of you guys. He's a serial entrepreneur. He started over 10 companies. He's very heavily involved, or were heavily involved in the venture capital
I,
space.
I have been in very early stage venture
Yeah,
capital.
so he was very involved in early venture stage capital companies, financing over 50, and he's here to give some good advice.
Thank you very much. I hope it's good advice. I never know until it's all over whether it really is or not. But I think the thing I'd like to talk about briefly is I think any kind of entrepreneurial enterprise, whether it's an individual or even within a company, starts with what's the dream, what's the vision, and what are the underlying beliefs that the founder has about their ability. Because if there's an old saying attributed to Henry Ford that says, whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. And there's a lot of truth to that because what you believe you can do, you often can do. But what I've seen a lot of with young entrepreneurs and not so young entrepreneurs, frankly, is a very poorly formed concept of what their dream really is. And again, there's an old saying, if you don't have a dream, how are you going to have a dream come true? And I think it's really true. You need to have that clear sense of where the dream is. And one of the things that I have found most useful, I've done it myself and I've watched other people do it, is to get in a quiet room, sit down with a piece of paper, and as fast as you can for 5 minutes or so, not a long time, write down all the things that you think you might like to do if you absolutely knew you couldn't fail. Now, your brain is going to edit that and say, oh, well, you couldn't do that. Don't let it. Just write them all down. There'll be some crazy stuff. Doesn't matter. When you get to the end of it, then edit the list and go through there and you'll find things that you say, wow, that's really worth building a career on. Or maybe you won't, but the chances are good. Then you weed it down and take the things, and out of that will come one or two that you can build the dream around. So to me, that's been very useful. It changed my life in a couple of critical points when I was stalled out and didn't know what I was going to do next. The second part, though, is I think equally important, and that is to bring that dream into the present. And for that, I use, again, an old technique. I call it active dreaming. Other people have called it visualization. It doesn't matter what you call it. But basically, it boils down to imagining what life would be like as if you had already fulfilled that dream. So, very simple analogy. Suppose my dream was to drive a new Tesla. I need to imagine myself in that car, what it feels like, the smell of the new car leather, the hum when I take off and I don't have an engine, I just have electricity. Whatever it is that's a real turn on for me, bring that into the imagination. And every day, think about that as if it had already happened. Now, I've done that personally, not so much about cars, although I did it with the very first car that I desperately wanted. Many, many years ago, I wanted a Mercedes. And sure enough, one day it showed up in the driveway. So it can be done. But what it really does is it brings that dream into the present as if it were real. And your subconscious mind does amazing things once it gets working. And it becomes a daily exercise, but then it's really, worth the doing.
So you train yourself to really just genuinely believe or imagine or
what I used to do and still do sometimes is I would literally stand in front of the mirror or sit and close my eyes and imagine what it would be like if I fulfilled my dream. So if my dream was to have a few $1,000,000 in the bank, how would my life change? Who would I talk to? How would people relate to me? What would it all feel like? But bring it into the present as if it were really true. We dream that way. Literally in sleep, you often wake up and you have to think for a moment, is that dream real or not real? Well, that's the same thing, and your subconscious mind will start doing that if you do it often enough and repetitively enough. And one bright day you say, oh wow, I'm there. Now there's a trap in that, because if you get to the dream and you kind of fulfill it and you don't replace it with a new one, guess what? You drift. And I did that for a couple of years after I kind of met my first target set of dreams. And I didn't reset them. I kind of sat back and said, wow, I've arrived. And all of a sudden I realized a year or so later, hey, you haven't done a darn thing for 2 years. Get with it again. And I started the process over, created a new set of dreams, and it worked like a charm for me.
So, what would you suggest to not get stuck in that trap? Because that's something I've heard where people have dreams, they get to it, and then they get caught up, and luckily 2 years for you, but 5, 10, 15 years pass, and you lose everything, and you're a mess.
Well, I think two things. One, make sure the dream is big enough and far enough in the future. But if you get it too far in the future, then you tend to get bogged down because it just seems too far. So what I have done and what I recommend is set up way stations. I used to be a sailor, still am, but I used to race sailboats. And you have way stations in plotting your course. So you know, because you can't go in a straight line with a sailboat if you're going into the wind. You know, I've got to go at 45 degrees angles to this point, and then I will achieve a certain point. I'll get past those rocks or whatever it is, and then I've got to make a turn and go to another one. So if you're plotting your dream, you pick some way stations. And you say, okay, I need to get to that point to fulfill the ultimate dream. That gives you something that's closer at hand that you can look at and say, am I getting there? Am I not? They say, again, there's an old story, but they say the original launch to the moon was off course 95% of the time. I don't know whether it's true or not, but it's illustrative. You constantly make course corrections, but you have a clear goal and you do have way stations along the way. That works. It works like a charm.
That makes sense. So you have your ultimate dream, but there's mini dreams within that ultimate dream that move you along the way?
Yeah, that's the way I look at it. I call them way stations. You can call them anything else. Targets, intermediate goals, whatever it is, but something that's within range so that when you get there, you know it. And then, celebrate a little bit when you get there.
Enjoy life
give yourself
along
a
the way.
party, take a small vacation, whatever, and then go on to the next one. That's worked for me, and I think it's worked for almost everybody I know that's been really successful has done that sort of thing.
That's very interesting.
And then the fourth thing, if you will, is in my sort of list of stuff is figure out what tools you have to have. If your dream is to be the next Mark Zuckerberg and found the next Facebook, well, you darn well better learn something about coding. If your dream is to be the next Warren Buffett, you darn well need to learn something about finance and lots of other things. People have these great dreams and then don't take the trouble to get the education that they need to get, whether it's in school, whether it's by taking a job that you can learn from, doing an apprenticeship. It may be a million things, but if you don't do it, then you're still just dreaming in the future. You got to bring it back into the present.
That makes sense.
And the only other thing I can think of, and it's the most important of all, is start. When you get all of that in your head, steal a phrase from Nike, just do it.
It's my favorite phrase. It actually goes back to the first long video I did a few days ago. My friend was saying, Jonathan, you're so good at talking. You like to, make videos and things like that. Stop planning, just do it. And I said, oh, okay, I'm going to go to Japan. I'm going to come back, and then I'm going to start. And she said, you leave to Japan on Sunday. It's Monday. Let's shoot today. I'm like, how about tomorrow? She said, today. And
Good for her.
I said, okay, let's do it. And it was the first time I was in front of a camera. I filmed myself and everything. I was a little nervous. And 15, 20 minutes into it, I liked it. When I finished, I looked back upon it and I said, oh my God, I can't believe I've been thinking about doing this for so long and I didn't just do it. And it was that first one that she forced me to do that now, you're my second video and...
Oh shucks, I wanted to be the first.
But it's true. I think a lot of people get stuck in the preparation phase and they just don't do it.
Right, and I think another thing that holds a lot of people back and gets them stuck or gets them in the procrastination is the fear of failure, which is really not fear of big economic failure, that it's fear of I'm going to look foolish to my friends or whatever. And that's, sometimes you just have to do what you did. I don't know if that was a factor for you, but just get out and do it, and you find that once you start doing it, it's like, well, so what? Not everybody likes it. Some people will, and that's all that matters.
Actually, that was one of the biggest things. I didn't want to look foolish or anything, and my brother told me something that really stuck with me. He said, a winner is just a loser that tried one more time. Learn to love to lose.
I love that phrase.
He said, learn to love to lose. When you love failure, when you love losing, when you love it so much that you're no longer afraid of it, that you look forward to losing, that's when you're just going to keep trying and trying and trying to the point where eventually you're going to win. He said that's what it is. Everybody just wants to win their first try. said Michael Jordan, all these people that everybody looks up to, nobody remembers all the times they lost. They just remember the times they won. So they keep going. They lose. Eventually they win, and then that's what they're known for. So that's, I'll be honest. I'm young. I was very afraid of looking foolish. Everybody nowadays doesn't want to look foolish. They want to look amazing.
Everybody at any age wants to not look foolish.
Yeah, but especially when you're first starting off and
Yeah.
building yourself and your personal brand, you really don't want to come off wrong. But you don't notice that all the people that are older and successful, they started at some point, and I doubt they started at age 18 being, Warren Buffett. So,
And
that is good advice.
I agree with you. And I don't know of any company that's been a huge success, or the founders behind it, that hasn't had along the way what I call near-death experiences. They ran out of money, something bad happened, maybe often. And any one of those could be interpreted as a failure. Oh my goodness, we ran out of money. Or, oh my goodness, our clinical trials failed on the new drug. Or the app didn't work. Or they become, again, sort of way stations, or they become learning experiences. It all depends on how you view what most people would call failure. And
How do you view failure?
I view failure in two ways. One, there is a part of failure, if you will, and I think in terms of business enterprises, where you look at it and you say, look, this business just isn't working, and I've tried 4 different variations, it's time to close that down. That's one kind of failure, but it's a failure of a project, not of me or of the general concept. But there is some truth, if you're in business, of knowing when to cut the losses. I've known people who just keep banging their heads against a wall, and that's one of the definitions of insanity. But the other kind of failure are just the failures of direction and focus and misreading the market. I'm on the board of a company that's basically created the prepaid debit card industry.
Really?
And the founder is a brilliant guy by the name of Steve Street. But his original concept was to sell prepaid debit cards to teenagers who couldn't get their parents' credit card to use in buying things online. Well, it turned out, after a lot of effort and quite a lot of money spent, that really wasn't a big usable market. The real market were the people, the typical person who shops at Walmart, income of $75,000 or less, doesn't really trust banks particularly, or bank expenses are too high, whatever. Steve managed to shift the whole company, found that new market, and now has a $2 billion company on the New York Stock Exchange. So
he admitted to himself he was
Yeah,
wrong, but just readjusted.
Those are, in my mind, those are not failures. Those are readjustments, of course, but most people think of them as failures. Most people would have quit. And the people that I know that have been successful didn't quit. I was building with some friends a high-rise office building many years ago. And we got caught in one of these financial crises, and the bank suddenly called all my loans. I'd borrowed way more than my net worth, so if I was going to either go bankrupt or figure out a way to get it paid off. Well, I won't bore you with the details, but I figured out a way.
Nice.
Because I said, this is not something that needs to fail. This is something that needs to find a new way. So did I fail in one sense? You bet. I picked the wrong banks. I picked the wrong timing. On the other hand, there's a 30-story high-rise office building sitting in Burbank, California that 2 friends of mine and I built. So I'm kind of happy about that.
That's nice. One last question. With all the information and knowledge that you know now at your age, what advice would you give to yourself when you were 18 to 22, going through college, if you have anything?
Start immediately. Don't wait until your peers say, well, it's okay now, you're old enough now, you have enough experience. Believe in myself today at age 18 or whatever, and begin doing things. I waited until I was in my 30s before I really trusted myself enough to go out on my own, start creating the businesses that I've created. I would love to have those 10 years back and have started at 20 instead of 30. So waiting doesn't really pay off. Now, you may need to do things to get experience. That's a different matter. But I was just holding down jobs because they paid me, and that was stupid, and I wish I had not done that.
That makes sense. So it's not really about just getting money, it's more about gaining knowledge and experience?
Yeah. Money and a job, I say to some of the kids that I work with from time to time, the most invaluable asset you can possibly have is a job. It can go tomorrow. But
Yeah.
if you use the job to build skill sets that someone else will want, it doesn't matter about the job. I had 3 different companies went bankrupt out from underneath me in the early stages of my career. I didn't bankrupt them, but I was suddenly without a job. Had I not built skills in those jobs that I could then translate to becoming self-employed or working somewhere else, I'd have been in deep trouble. So the money and the salary, now if you're going to borrow to get a mortgage on a house, they all want your W-2s
Yeah.
and I haven't had a real job for 40 years, and that's always a trouble when I go to get a loan. But the point is you solve that. But the real answer is the most important thing is the knowledge, the tools that you have, because those you can pack them up and take them with you.
I appreciate that.
Thank you for taking
you,
some
Ken.
time to
I
talk to me.
appreciate
I
that.
enjoyed it.
Well,
Thank you.
Thank you.
We went